Welcome to Business Authority Radio, bringing you insights from today's thought leaders, professionals, and influencers. With your hosts, Neil Howe and Craig Williams.
Welcome to another episode of Business Authority Radio. I have Matt Hardage here. And by the way, yes, this is Craig Williams. I have Matt Hardage of Matt Hardage Consulting, correct?
Yes.
Matt is of one of my younger interviews. Matt has a background, a very extensive background, and a lot of it comes from his experience with his family. Family has a wider range of experience in politics, in the restaurant business, and you were blessed with an opportunity to be under such a spectrum of business, but you also saw that you had to find your own way.
Yeah.
And Matt, tell me a little bit about, your sports background, how you got into the restaurant business, how you saw that there was some jewels in politics, but they weren't the traditional jewels that some people go after when they're in that industry, if you want to call it industry. Of course, politics is an industry.
Absolutely. People make millions of dollars a year.
Exactly. But you saw that there are some assets, some experience that help you build your character and your persona. You're in your 20s, man, and for a number of years you've advised people twice and sometimes three times your age.
Yeah.
And I know as an authority in media, as an authority in marketing and business, a lot of times it is about the experience, but it's kind of hard to look at somebody younger than you and say, what does he have to offer me? And that's where humility has to come in. That's where I don't care who you are. If you're not of a mindset of learning, you're going to stop growing. So Matt, tell me a little bit about your journey, and we'll get into, where you're going with your consulting firm and how you got here. So, Matt?
Well, I'll go ahead and start, like you said, with my sports background. So I grew up my entire life pretty much in a sports-based environment. Started playing football after I was kicked out of soccer for being too aggressive with it. And so started playing football for most of my life, kind of built a need for competition. That was really my life passion. And then my dad ended up opening a restaurant here in Atlanta when I was between 10 and 11 years old. And from the very get-go, I was always very interested in trying to help kind of generate revenue for the family. And so I asked my dad for a job, and I begged him, and I begged him, and I begged him, and he finally let me have a job working as a dish boy, which I ended up regretting and begging him for another job. And so I kind of worked my way up through the business, ended up waiting tables and learning how to do that and developing faster than I can really explain. In a period of 2 to 3 months, I would say I probably went from about a 2-table section to I was waiting an entire side of the restaurant single-handedly on a Saturday, fully loaded, and I was just addicted to the hustle. I was addicted to the fast pace, and so
being in the weeds sometimes, but working yourself out of that. I found that if you're not in service, a service industry business, a sales industry business, it's very hard to really make it in the consulting or strategy side anyways. And that's incredible for you. I think your father was playing a little psychology with you because he knew the value that you were going to get out of serving, you know, and that's basically when you're in the consulting and strategy business, it's about serving, and you hit it hard being in the restaurant business because there's a lot of literal serving there.
Yeah. I mean, and consulting is really nothing more than being kind of an overglorified servant leader. I guess you're brought in to lead over something, and then you're essentially there to serve whatever the other person's needs are. And that was kind of a principle that my family was very adamant about raising me on was the mentality of a servant leader, doing for others in order to do for the better of the group. And making sure that I wasn't asking for things that were unrealistic because I wasn't willing to do them. So that definitely helped a lot in evolving into a consultant. So I worked at my dad's restaurant. I was waiting tables, and then got to the point where, of course, I needed more. So I started learning how to cook in the back of the house and then run the front of the house at the same time.
Wow.
Just because I have such an addiction to fast-paced mentality and productivity. It's just, if I'm not being productive, I drive myself crazy.
Yeah. Were you a running back or a wide receiver?
I was a linebacker.
Oh my goodness! Is it that fast?
Waiting for things to come.
I was waiting for things to come. Yeah, I hear you.
But yeah, no, I mean, I got so hooked on the fast-paced mentality, on the productivity, that I had to have it all the time. Well, and then he ended up selling his shares in the restaurant, and so he got out of that, and there was pretty quickly an opening for him to start running campaigns again like he had done before.
Wow. Because politicians eat all the time. They
eat all the time, and then they go run for an election. You know,
that's how they stay in shape, keep the balance, right?
So he ended up starting his own marketing firm back up. It was kind of a small boutique agency, and it was pretty much revolved around a few key clients. And this was probably one of the more developmental phases of my life. This was while I was probably between 13 and 15. And so I had started learning website design or development, just simple development at first. And then kind of self-taught design during that campaign, because I went and sat through a couple meetings with an agency that I ended up later on going to go work for due to this conversation. But I went and sat and saw what they were doing, and I was like, I want to do that. That is awesome. I love what they're doing. And so I learned development from a family friend of ours, just real simple HTML from a friend of ours that is one of the higher ups of the weatherchannel.com. And he taught me the fundamentals, and then I kind of self-taught design. Well, if you're in that industry, you kind of know that you're either a designer or a developer. There's not very many who are a hybrid of both. And so during a period of time for my parents' divorce, there was a time where I went and worked for that agency that kind of got me hooked on the whole being a big-time graphic designer. And so I went and I started interning for them over in Marietta when I was 16. And pretty quickly I was trying so hard to outrun all of the other developers and the designers all at once. And so I would take projects home with me and then come back in the morning with them completely done. And so I ended up getting moved up to a full-time paid position, which was very nice. And then that allowed me to be able to go start sitting in on meetings with clients and start hearing what input they were looking for, and what kind of concerns that they had as far as their marketing goes overall. And so I got to learn kind of what they were looking for, and then James, the guy that I was working for in the agency, who's the owner, I worked directly underneath him. He kind of let me start taking a role in having those conversations with the clients and letting that kind of be my testing ground to see how I would do with it. And so that's really where I would say I started doing the actual consulting piece of it.
Well, I think you've been doing consulting work from the time you were in the restaurant business, because consulting is about listening, hearing the order.
Yeah.
I mean, and as a server, you had to be attentive to what the person was ordering, basically, and making sure you got it. You got it just like they wanted, because you'd have to go back to the kitchen if you didn't.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, it's really kind of reading in between the lines.
Yeah, so
consulting.
Yeah. So that's interesting that you came out of that, and so you having that learned mentality to be open for the opportunity to hear your client, your customer out, and literally serve them up what they're asking for from the beginning. And I think that's why, I mean, at that age, you're so ripe and you're open.
Yeah.
I mean, and a lot of times we we take the small beginnings for granted.
Yeah.
Of the youth, and it's the older generations. We have the bad habit of going so quick to try to teach, as opposed to, they're learning from our actions.
Yeah.
And your parents seem to have understood putting you in a servant environment, conditioning you for being open to hearing what the client had to say will open doors for you many times. Because whether you're serving a person at a restaurant, or you're serving you're lobbying for something as a politician, you have to listen to your constituency.
Exactly.
You have to hear what they have to say, so you know how to serve them best to get their support. And what you're doing is you're trying to garner that their support either in votes, or them being out there promoting your brand, or your name for others to buy in.
Exactly.
So that's interesting. You've been cultivated to be that strategist and consultant for more than half of your life, sounds like.
Yeah, for the past, I'm 22 now, so I started working full time when I was 11. So for the past 11 years, I've worked 50 plus hours a week. So probably.
You got your 10,000 hours, it sounds like. And it definitely makes you a great candidate for our show here at Authority. That's who we deal with. You just got yours a little bit early, and that's pretty interesting. Tell me how you think, you talked about earlier about, as an athlete, and, that alpha dog mentality. But as an athlete, the being a competitive and individual definitely puts you in a place where you have to stay ahead. I found being very competitive, your mind has to be ahead of your quote competition.
Yeah,
that's what makes you competition yourself. You have to be thinking ahead. What else do you think being an athlete contributed to?
It really kind of helps show you that the biggest competition that you're ever going to have in your life is yourself, and getting yourself out of whatever mental state that you're in, and just deciding to push through it and keep going. As an example of this, I just found out probably about 2 or 3 months ago that I have apparently severely extreme ADD. Go figure. I run at 1,000,000 miles a minute, and I try and switch off between everything.
Yeah.
But I have severely bad ADD, and that was something I kind of used as a crutch for certain periods of my life. As things were getting rough, I would kind of blame it on that.
Yeah.
And granted, it's awful when I don't have the medicine, but just learning how to overcome that. The psychiatrist was telling me that while I have probably some of the most severe that he's seen in somebody my age, the memory portion, which is something that you use to compensate for the rest of it, the memory portion was in the top 1 percentile of the country, which, me hearing that, I don't believe it at all, because I'm like, I can't remember anything. I feel like I can't, but that's just one of the things that it teaches you, is that you are definitely going to be the biggest distraction in your own life, because you will always have something else that could come up, or that could be a better opportunity.
Yeah.
And you have to make an assertive decision right there on the spot of which side of the ball are you going to go try and chase. You have to decide, okay, do I go do this that I've already been working for and I've been training for, or do I just drop it and try and go cut this other angle and make that route?
Gotcha.
And so you kind of have to learn how to, just like being a linebacker, you have to learn how to read the play, but you have to learn how to read the play that you set up, And
Gotcha.
so you kind of have to figure that out.
That's interesting. I'm sure people have definitely said I've resembled that. And you brought it up, so I'll address it. I think whether it's on the spectrum of autism, I think we are all on a spectrum of distraction in this day and age, with all of the screens and noises that are trying to get our attention. And I think it's scientifically, they say the attention span of, individuals are less than a goldfish now.
Yeah.
It's probably 7 to 11 seconds, and we're all of us are on to the next thing.
Well, it's from guys like me from 5 years ago when Facebook, or 5 or 10 years ago when Facebook was first starting out. I mean, it's distractive marketing, right? I mean, that the entire idea was to get you to stop what you're doing at work and then
pay attention,
turn around and go do what you're doing,
and I
play
think
some Zynga games on Facebook.
And I think all of us have a level of that. And I think those of us who are considered the most distracted make the best consultants and strategists, because when it comes to us, we tend to be all over the place. But when we're serving someone, we're truly serving that person from a place of focus.
Exactly.
And helping them to be more focused on the thing that we see they need to be paying attention to.
Yeah.
So that's an asset.
Yeah, and I definitely think it kind of helps us cover more of the map than everybody else.
Most definitely.
We have more insight and wisdom when it comes to actually giving that piece of advice to the person we're working with.
And yes, it is from experience, but also it's from our individual experience of being so distracted. I agree with you 100%. I'd say the audience agrees with you 100% too. Our biggest enemy is ourselves, no matter what labels we put on ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking earlier about generations, the millennial word.
Yeah.
And I think we all need to step back a little from all of the different labels we put on each other.
Yeah.
And we're human beings.
Yeah.
And I think we need to spend more time focusing on that the similarities, because there are more similarities that we have than we are different. And I think as we open ourselves and we come to the table as that 99.99% of being the same person, and put that 0.001% of our difference to the side, it'll help us focus. And we have to come with a little humility, no matter how old or young we are.
Yeah.
There are so many. Sometimes I have to pause and I say, hey, my daughters grew up in a world where there's always been a computer. When I was growing up, the first introduction I got to computers, or as I understood them to be computers, I was a junior in high school and we were using punch cards back then, and we were excited to make the computer say hello and hi. And, it was just exciting to be able to make it write a command and make it say hello. And, whereas that's all you've ever known. A lot of you haven't even, you don't know what a rotary phone is, or haven't seen too many of them,
Well, fortunately, my grandmother has been in IT since it became an industry. And so she made me, when I started showing a little bit of interest in it, she made me go all the way back to the beginning and understand how every piece worked.
That's incredible.
Up to it.
That's incredible.
I definitely attribute my ability to take a concept and break it down for somebody else to understand it at a more palatable level to my mother and my grandmother, because there's been many successful people, including Elon Musk, that kind of made the statement that in order for you to actually genuinely understand something, you have to be able to take in whatever information it is, be able to process it and understand it to the level that you think you do, and then be able to take that and give that piece of information to a child and break it down to their intellectual abilities, and then you fully understand it. And that's something that before I even ever heard that quote or read that post, I was forced to, or not forced, I was kind of brought up to learn that way, to be able to break it down, to take the information to where the person receiving it is, and make it easier for them to comprehend it.
Wow. It's Craig Williams with Matt Hardage of Matt Hardage Consulting. He's making big solutions for small businesses. And we're having a very exciting conversation here about a lineage of, it sounds like your environment was somewhat eclectic, in a sense that your father was more entrepreneurial. He had a history of being in businesses that allowed you to have an ecosystem of serving others, which I think is the greatest foundation to build any type of business on. And then going into politics, which, the balance of politics is you have to see at least two sides.
Yeah.
You have to consider there is there's a lot of disrespect in politics, mind you, but there is a lot of intentional respect. Yeah. In a sense of considering and hearing out the other side so that you can share your side. And there's that diplomacy that is that's the culture, to be diplomatic.
And I think that's kind of what's missing in today's conversation about politics, is because by nature as millennials, we've been force-fed a million different ways to do everything all at once from our phones with our fingertips. Yeah. And so we're so quick to fly off the handle with a response, and we're only listening to respond. Or I say we as a whole, but we're only listening to respond. We're not listening to solve. We're not listening to understand.
Or listening with a servant's ear, because once again, we go back to the beginning. When you're taking the order, you know how the menu has something. But if somebody doesn't want onions, or they don't want this, or they don't want that, you have to hear that. So listening with a servant's ear, that's.
And I think it's more so just even the simpler concept of listening. I think if everybody came to the table with the understanding of, hey, we're both going to listen just as much as we talk, then there would actually be conversation and not so much just shouting back and forth with hateful things. And I mean, I don't voice a whole lot of opinions out loud, just for the simple fact that generally it's rebutted with some sort of fly off the hip, response from somebody else that's not.
They're an expert on their opinion.
Yeah,
too.
They're an expert on their opinion, and I mean everybody has them, and you know how the whole saying goes. But I mean, I was taught from people like Herman Cain, because when I was involved with the campaigns and everything, it was in the middle of the town halls and all of the conservative healthcare movements and all of that kind of stuff. So I got to very early on see firsthand how everything was orchestrated and how everything went down. Mm-hmm. And from a group of people with such a high ethical standard and such a morally straight compass, I mean, that was absolutely amazing to me, because they could sit there and get confronted with all of these things that were completely irrelevant, nonsensical, and stay completely calm and be able to have a conversation through that. And that was one of the things that I'll admit for a long time took me forever to grasp, because I'm immediately trying to think 12 steps ahead and figure out what the end solution is. And so I've already got the response before it comes out of your mouth.
Or more of reacting. You're setting yourself up to react and respond. And I think that's a good point. And I think that's part of diplomacy. Yeah. Creating an environment where everybody feels safe, even when we don't agree. Yeah. I'm all right with the fact that at least you let me disagree or show my disagreement with what you had to say. So I think there's power in that.
Yeah, my frustration with at least my generation as millennials is just that we've taken kind of a gentleman's sport, if you will, of politics, and we've kind of made it into a free-for-all brawl, and so every time somebody opens their mouth about it, they're bound to be wrong about something. And so it's just, sometimes you gotta decide what's more important, saving your time and your energy and putting it into something that's actually going to make a difference, or sitting there spouting out things that aren't going to really do anything for you.
Wow. You also have a little experience in the area of franchising.
I do. It's kind of a shallow pool, but it's like a mile long. Yeah. One of my mentors, my current mentor, Bob Griffin, has been a franchise consultant for 25 plus years now. I'm pretty sure he's worked with every major franchise at this point. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I've had my fair share of the franchise industry in and of itself, and it's kind of like it's kind of like a couple previous generations trying to jump into an easy bake, pre-made, frozen food solution of getting into a business sometimes, and sometimes that can be an issue because the vernacular is not the same. Yeah. So the conversation is almost impossible to have sometimes when the vernacular is not even on the same playing field, when one thing is another in everybody else's eyes. So, I mean, I have had my fair share of it. So there's a lot of things that I've taken from it.
Yeah. Well, I definitely see the power of having that experience with franchising, because you have that ready-made. There's systems.
Exactly.
Understanding systems and what has worked for sometimes somebody having to buy into something that is stable.
Yeah. And I mean, when I was doing franchises, I set up packages because I would go in and I'd say, okay, what is corporate not providing you? Right. So when you buy a franchise, you're paying $40,000+ a year in royalties just to carry the brand's name. Mm-hmm. And depending on the corporation will determine how much you're getting in marketing assistance. Some of them will have marketing funds that you don't get to touch and that really doesn't do anything for you. And so some of these owners will go out and they'll spend their own money and end up going into a little bit of debt in hopes that they're going to recover their business overall. Mm-hmm. But then some companies are fully equipped with a really amazing marketing package. And so those were the guys that I didn't necessarily try and go after unless those owners wanted to do something above and beyond. And those are generally multi-unit owners that had multiple different locations in the same general area and had overlapping territories. Because then corporate kind of leaves those guys out on their own to fend for themselves. They just let them have their own marketing budget. But yeah, I mean, I would set up packages based on which company I was focusing on. I had a package for Service Master for a little bit working with them. I don't know if I'm going to get in any trouble saying their name because I know they have their own corporate.
Well, they're not sponsoring the show. We shout out to Service Master.
Yeah, restore and clean.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, they have their own marketing team, but it's just, I mean, everybody's different. You know? There's not. One thing that I learned very early on in this business is that there's never really a cookie cutter approach. And so I've always had kind of an issue building packages because going from one franchise to another and offering them the same set of packages is not the same. They don't have the same needs. One of them could be completely farther ahead than the rest of them. I mean, I know a franchisee that has 15 locations in Georgia, and he's just constantly buying up locations and locations and locations and doesn't even really spend any money on marketing because he's buying everybody else out. Yeah. And so
that's a strategy there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a strategy in and of itself. I mean, no strategy is some strategy. Yeah. You know, that's a decision. But I mean, I believe in tailoring a unique turnkey solution for each one of my clients, and I kind of sit down and I spend probably a lot more time on discovery than a lot of other people do, trying to figure out what they are doing and what they have done and try and getting as much information as I can about their past and what their goals and ambitions are so that I can create a tailored solution for them, you know, because I'd rather go get a tailored handmade Italian suit than go to K&G and go buy a two-piece set for $100, you know. Mm-hmm. And so I always kind of proposition it as, well, would you rather have a Civic or would you rather have a S550, you know? And so, I mean, the obvious answer everybody gives is the S550. It's not always within everybody's price range, but I try and make it work where I can, you know, when somebody has the need and the ambition to do it. So
Matt Hardage, big business, big solutions for small businesses, which is big business. Trust me, that's big business.
It is a large industry.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your biggest focus and some of the misconceptions that people have of Matt. You know, they're coming in and they're expecting, you know, probably this. I mean, listening to you, I would not say you were in your 20s, but you're definitely a Renaissance man. And thanks, big props to your parents. Yeah. You know, two different, one's more of a fundamentalist, you know, conservative side. Yeah. There was a balance. Sounds like you were raised in a balance, although maybe the personal side didn't work out like we would have wanted it.
Sometimes it's a tornado, sometimes it's a yin and yang. Yeah. It's just how you look at it.
Definitely. And it definitely cultivated a resourceful young man who has a lot to offer, not only to your clients, but to an audience of many who need to start opening themselves up to what they're not used to. And that's maybe a younger generation or the younger looking to be mentored. I think the mentoring-mentee concept will never go out of style, but you need to have humility to want to, you know, listen and learn. And like you said, some of some generations have an issue listening to other generations.
Absolutely.
But if we open ourselves, you've shown that being open, of course, some of that was forced upon you as a child.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that was a good. Those are good
I'm
characteristics.
thankful for it now.
Yeah, you can appreciate it.
Yeah, because now I can walk up and I can approach everybody.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if they're the CEO of Microsoft or if they're the janitor that's cleaning the toilets.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same conversation. It just might dictate how I dress that day, you know, depending on how the meeting is set.
Awesome.
But I mean, yeah, I have spent most of my my career advising people 3 times my age. On how to effectively spend their money on something that is the first thing to get thrown out anytime money gets tough. Marketing is the first thing in every recession to get thrown out the window. Mm-hmm. Everybody's like, no, you know what, we can cut the 30% marketing fund, or even the bare minimum 3% marketing fund, and we can go ahead and cut all that out and save expenses and lay off this many employees when this happens. But then the recession bounces back, and those people that kept their money in marketing are coming out of it alive, and the companies that kind of sold off their marketing budget, so to speak, are stripping themselves for assets, and just kind of liquidating whatever they can. So, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that trying to get people to understand that it's not necessarily one way fits everything.
Yeah.
You know, not everybody needs to go pay an influencer on Instagram, or needs to have a YouTube channel, or needs to have this, that, and the other. Some people just need what they have. And sometimes that works for them. Sometimes it's going to work for them for the next 5 years, and then year 6, it's either not going to work, or it's going to work a lot better than what any of us thought it was going to.
Yeah.
And
times are changing so fast. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and thanks to Google and all the other big dogs in the arena, everything could change at the drop of a dime, you know? And so it's a completely evolving marketplace. And so you almost have to be ADD to be able to survive in this business, because you have to be able to accept the fact that last week you learned a concept and you mastered it and you got it completely down, and you woke up to an email this morning and now everything is completely different, and what you just learned doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
But it teaches you the fundamentals. And I think the biggest thing that was, for me, and I guess it was kind of a misconception in and of myself, I kind of appreciate the Gary Vee saying where he did awful in school because public schools are not a huge service to entrepreneurial types.
Yeah.
And I do have a theory that entrepreneurship could be a physical piece of DNA. But that's a really long conversation for another day.
That's part 2. Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that, because I didn't do well in school. I did well when I was homeschooled, and that was because I kind of set my own pace and I could go really, really fast. Mm-hmm. And then I went to public school and I started having to slow down and wait for everybody. Yeah. And so I couldn't do that anymore. And so I worked all the way through. I worked through high school, just for the simple fact that I was completely bored. Yeah. But the piece about that is that it's really just being able to adapt to whatever's thrown at you, to be able to kind of change directions whenever you need to, and that's not taught currently in schools, and that's really one of the biggest things, is that it's not practical. You know, the school system is not practical right now, and I think that kind of gave me a bad taste in my mouth about when I was told I should become a lifelong student, right? And now that I'm past school and I'm out of school and I'm not going.
It's just a lifelong student of what? That's basically,
I mean,
and that infrastructure is not always going to be in a building that we call school. And it sounds like some of those environments are going to be built by our parents. So surrender.
Yeah, I mean, and now that I'm out of it, I have become completely addicted to trying to learn at least 2 new things a day. Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing that's kind of helped me start building for the future and still providing for the current. Because I mean, you have to keep changing. You have to constantly keep trying to learn, because new things will happen.
Only thing constant. Yeah, is change.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, thank you so much. Tell the audience and our listeners how we could get in touch with you. Where do we find you on social media, or your URL? Tell us how we're gonna
I made it very simple for everybody. My name is Matt Hardage, Hardage, and all of my social media and my domain name are all matthardage.com or @matthardage.
Awesome. Well,
Super
you heard
simple.
it here. Thank you so much, Matt, and I appreciate you sharing and dropping the wisdom on
No
us,
worries, man.
on us seasoned folk. Looking forward to seeing you do great things.
You've been listening to Business Authority Radio with Neil Howe and Greg Williams. To learn more about the resources mentioned in today's show or to listen to past episodes, visit businessauthorityradio.com.